B-29, a fearsome weapon of war. Developed and introduced at enormous cost to the US government, the Superfortress was a cut above, and there's a kind of duality to it. It brought terror and destruction to the Japanese homeland, not just from the nuclear weapon it infamously dropped, but from the monumental firebombing raids that burned whole cities to the ground. But conversely, it played a crucial role in developing post-war civil aviation and the field of aircraft design as a whole. It's a thoroughbred of a machine. 10 men, a 220-mile, 350km/h cruising speed, a 3,250-mile, that's 5,200km range, 20,000 pounds, 9,100 kilograms of bombs at a maximum. As the British Army retreated at Dunkirk, the proposed new design was designated the B-29. It would go on to cost more than the development of the nuclear bomb. It brought new standards of comfort to crews, and it would carry the US into the atomic age. So, what was it like to actually fly in one of those incredible, terrifying machines? I went to go and find out. This is one of the last flying B-29s in the world. She's a gleaming, silver, beautiful machine. Her name is Fifi. Fifi started out back at the end of the war when she rolled off the line at Renton, Boeing's plant in Washington state. The B-29 project famously cost more than the Manhattan Project, the US secret development of the nuclear bomb. When it first appeared, the Army, Air Force, and the public alike were captivated by its sleek, purposeful lines. This was a machine that looked like it had come from the future.
This is it. This is the B-29, the plane you've been waiting for. Yes, the B-29 is everything you've been promised. And the pilot who flies one has an enviable job. Important, glamorous, and tough. Here's a B-29 pilot.
So my name is Neil Broussard, one of the captains on Fifi. Currently been with the airplane for about 6 years. In the vintage airplane for community, about, we'll call it 14 years. So my first experience in this world was on a B-25 and a B-17. And then through that, was able to meet one of the Czech pilots on Fifi, and then he said, "Hey, would you like to fly a B-29?" And like anyone would say, "Why, yes, I would."
Fifi is one of the impressive warbirds lovingly maintained and flown for the public by the Commemorative Air Force, an institution that's been around since the early 60s. Their fleet includes some 170 aircraft, most of them airworthy, alongside Diamond Lil. Their B-24, the Superfortress, is a real jewel in the crown of the collection, because there's only one other flying example. Fifi is in very safe hands. Captain Neil is one cool customer.
I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana. I've been flying about 30 years. Started when I was a teenager, and most of my family flies. We have a airstrip in southern Louisiana, and currently work at a legacy airline with my cousin as well. He flies there on the 737, and it's a real privilege. I also get to train our new pilots when they come to our airline, which is just great. So just lots going on, and then family-wise, have 3 kids at home and a wife. So looking forward to getting back to them soon.
But before Captain Neil can get back to his family, we have an important job to do first. Fifi is here at Ellington Airport in Houston. Wings Over Houston 2025 is a weekend program of exciting aerial displays culminating in the CAF's famous Tora 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 Pearl Harbor display, and the flight of Fifi and the other airworthy B-29 dock. It's an intense couple of days for the crew, who need to fly with pinpoint precision and all of their focus. At the end of the weekend comes the flight back home to Dallas, where Fifi's based. That's what we're preparing for now. Walking around Fifi, it's impossible not to be impressed by the modernity of the thing. She still looks space-aged and mean. The plexiglass greenhouse nose sparkles in the early morning sun. High-altitude bombing was a great way to get above bad weather, and the worst of the anti-air defences, but it presented problems. Temperatures up there absolutely plummeted to well below zero. Bomber crews rugged up in thick jackets and trousers, even electrically heated ones, but frostbite was a not uncommon occurrence. Then, of course, there was the thinness of the air. Oxygen masks had to supply breathable stuff as soon as the aircraft climbed high enough. The B-29 was among the first bombers into service that changed all of that. The first was technically the British Vickers Wellington Mark VI, although that was never actually used for bombing. The B-29's pressurization system made use of a series of heavy-duty bulkheads that bookended pressurized zones for the crew, including the forward cabin and the rear gunner's compartment. Connecting the two was a tunnel. We'll come back to that later. It meant that the B-29's crew could ride in relative warmth and comfort, without need for oxygen masks, while their bomber could zoom at speed up to 31,850 feet, over 9 kilometers above the Earth. Crews cheerfully called it a shirt-sleeves bomber. Japanese fighter aircraft could barely hope to catch it. In the event, only 147 B-29s were lost to enemy action. Most of that was really thanks to flak, since the Japanese high-altitude interceptors, like the Ki-45 Toryu, were at the very top of their ceiling above 30,000 feet. And then only 1,700 of those things were ever made. The Ki-84 Hayate stood a much better chance, with a ceiling of some 38,000 feet, but the force of defensive Japanese fighters was scattered throughout the Pacific and relatively poorly coordinated. That, and detection, was bad. The Superfortresses could basically come and go as they wished. If a B-29 was caught out by interceptors at altitude, its best defense was to simply enter a shallow dive. It was fast enough that it could reach up to something like 350 miles per hour. But designers also knew the Superfortress needed a big jump in defensive armament from the old B-17. As designed, 10 Browning 50 cals covered the defensive arcs and greatly increased the amount of lead the 29 could send forward after air crews found their B-17s to be badly lacking in defense against frontal attacks. There were 4 turrets, all of them computer-controlled from the fire control station toward the tail. All the way aft sat a tail gunner armed with either twin 50s and a 20mm cannon. The cannon, though, was unreliable, and a jam couldn't be cleared mid-air, so usually the thing was taken off. The Superfortress certainly earned its nickname, and that computer-controlled aiming system was a brilliant bit of engineering that could plot target trajectory and offer the correct firing solution. I continue my inspection on the ground. In Fifi's bomb bay, you'll find a few replica 500-pound high-explosive bombs. The twin bomb bays are impressive. It allowed the B-29 to carry a pretty serious payload, up to 20,000 pounds of the conventional and ubiquitous 500-pound high-explosive types. For today's mission, though, Fifi would be carrying about 100 pounds of my luggage. The entire crew gathers for the customary briefing as Captain Neil runs through the weather conditions and our flight plan. It's windy today. We were meant to be bound for Dallas Executive, RBD, but we'll need to make for Perot Field at Fort Worth instead. With the briefing out of the way, it was time to hop aboard. The big Superfortress is split into those 2 distinct cabins, the flight deck up front and the after cabin with the big bomb bays in between. To get between the 2 of them, you need to crawl, famously, through that tunnel, the small pipe that essentially runs for about 35 feet. I was invited to ride up front with Captain Neil and the flight crew, but first I'd need to get up there, and there's only one way in, up a ladder inside the nose wheel well. For a big guy like me, it's kind of an awkward affair, but I managed it. The flight deck is like something straight out of Star Wars. In fact, I'm pretty sure the Millennium Falcon's cockpit was directly based on that of the B-29. It's fairly spacious, with decent visibility thanks to that extensive plexiglass paneling. Here I got to watch Neil running through checks with his co-pilot Patrick and engineer Corbett. Patrick's a lovely guy, and Neil, he's a cool character. So too is Corbett. He's the youngest of the bunch, but he's got a wealth of brilliant knowledge, the kind of thing you only learn from doing, and not found in any textbook or handbook. It's the stuff that's passed down through generations of guys who've flown and maintained the Superfortress. It's his job to monitor the complex array of engine gauges, basically anything not directly related to the actual flight handling of the plane. It looks like a confusing mess, but fortunately, he knows it all like the back of his hand.
Yeah, so engineer's panel, the main controls that you do like while flying is your throttles are these 4, your mixtures are these 4, your cowl flaps which control the cooling of the engine are here, and then your oil cooler door which controls the oil temperature are these 4. And then the other 4 you mess with are these, which are the props for the engine to control the RPM. The rest of the stuff, for the most part, is either for emergencies or for starting the airplane and other like phases of flight. So like boost pumps and stuff are for emergencies or if you're taking off or landing. Pitot heat just is always on when we're flying. And then the rest of this is all startup stuff. So you have pre-oilers. So what that does is it basically force feeds oil into the engine, and it'll coat the cylinders and everything that needs to be lubricated first, and it also draws the oil out of the bottom cylinders, so you don't have what's called a hydrolock, which is basically there's oil sitting in the bottom cylinder, and so the piston can't move, and you bend things that way. So we do that, and then you have the starters and the boosters. So the starter is like a starter in a car. It's a flywheel that spins the motor, and then a booster is basically, the easiest way to describe it is it's basically you're hooking up a car battery, like you're jump starting the airplane. So you're giving it immediate full power right away instead of letting it kind of catch itself up. Engine primers is how you kind of inject fuel into the engine for starting. Jets. Frickin' jets. Yeah. Oh, that's a cool one. Yeah. So this is your main source of information. Some of this stuff is mirrored for the pilot, like the manifold and the RPMs. But for all of the main engine stuff, like cylinder head temperatures, which is the temperature of the engine, oil temperatures, torque pressure, which is the easiest way to describe it is it's the nose case of the engine's power, and then your oil pressure. And so these are all things that only I have, and that's what you're kind of constantly monitoring, making sure your oil temperatures are in a specific range, your cylinders are in a specific range. Your torque pressures are a good way of indicating, like, if you're having an engine issue, if you're having, you know, something's coming apart internally, that's kind of a good starting point. Then you have stuff like your cowl flaps indicator to tell you where your cowl flaps are set. RPM, manifold pressure, like any normal high-powered airplane. Fuel pressure. We have an altimeter and an airspeed back here to help with the pilots, and also it helps us with situational awareness. This is a sync RPM, so it's a way to sync all the propellers kind of up to each other. And then your fuel flows tells you basically how much fuel you're burning, so like kind of like a miles per gallon thing in your car, but these are in hundreds of gallons and it's in hours. So the chip detectors they're these two plugs, one's in the front section of the engine, one's in the aft section of the engine. And they're basically these little plugs that have a magnet in it. And so the idea is that something in the engine is coming apart. The metal will stick to this magnet, and it'll create close a circuit. And so that'll pop a light on our panel here. And that helps us understand, okay, something's going wrong. The funny thing about chip detectors is a lot of people don't like them because it can be, you have a piece of fuzz that comes off of your shirt when you're doing an oil change or something. That could get caught in that and it'll set it off. And so it's like, then you have to stop the engine, drain the oil from it, pull the plug, check it, and then put it back. It's a process. So they're kind of nuisance plugs is what a lot of people call them. Other than that, you're watching some other stuff here and there, voltages and electrical loads every now and then. But once you get in the air, it's kind of just a very slow sit around process, You're not doing a whole lot, which is nice.
Flight checks are underway and there's a lot to be ticked off. Something occurred to me. I'd long wanted to try crawling my way through the famous B-29 tunnel. I wasn't allowed to do it in flight. Anything that could distract the crew from their important work, like me getting stuck or claustrophobic, wasn't on the table. Fair enough. So this was my chance. Okay. It's tight. Let's do it. Oh. Trying to tip my head on anything. It's not very elegant. This plane was made for 22-year-olds in 1944. Not overweight 30-year-olds in 2025 like me. Oh. They're very thoughtfully put. Padding down here. Doing this on bare steel and rivets. Not a fun way to spend your afternoon. Whew. Getting through the tunnel is kind of the easy part. Getting out of it, not so easy. I made it. I emerged at the other end and escaped the tunnel with the grace of a well-trained ballerina. Okay, maybe I actually fell out of it, but anyway, I managed to squeeze my 6'4", 245-pound bulk through that tidy tunnel. I had no hope of turning around in the damn thing halfway down, but I'm glad I can tick it off my airplane bucket list. Now I just needed to head back to the flight deck. Don't ask how I got out of that. Very inelegantly, although it is worth it because of the view. Whew. Corbett had his eyes on his instruments as we began to start up, and the engines fired and sputtered into life. A little earlier, we'd conducted an engine test on the ground, and for the benefit of a technician who was recording audio, Corbett got the thing up to takeoff power. Now, I have to say, it was easily the loudest thing I've ever heard. It rattled my eardrums as it approached 2300 RPM with a roar of sheer power. The Wright R3350 is a legend in aviation, the kind of engine that can win a war. They powered everything from Hawker Sea Furies to DC-7s, the Fairchild boxcar of Flight of the Phoenix fame to the legendary and beautiful Lockheed Constellation. It definitely wasn't smooth sailing though. At first, the engine had serious reliability issues. The high amount of magnesium used in the engine's crankcase to save on weight meant that a fire could sear with a core temperature around 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit or over 3,000 degrees Celsius. Now, that kind of heat could eat clear through the wing's main spar and break the aircraft up. It would take some time for most of the engine's kinks to get worked out. In the end, the duplex Cyclone became a true powerhouse, and it's a reliable unit. More than 50,000 of them were made, and some stayed in active duty on the likes of firefighting P-2V Neptunes up until 2017. Even so though, Fifi went through an alarming number of the things. Logbook records show 11 engines in 1 year. Fifi has been in the air since the 1970s, and unfortunately, eventually, the original 3350s were just no longer tenable. Spare parts dried up totally. The Superfortress was re-engined with a kind of hybrid arrangement, a cross between the 3350s taken from a DC-7 and an A1 Skyraider. It removed the turbo compound, giving much better reliability, but it also doubled the engine's horsepower. For today's flight, Fifi is in fine form. The 3350s roar with a satisfying growl, telling Corbett and the rest of us that she's ready to go. Each engine starts up with a whine and a bang, and before long they're humming in happy unison as Corbett and the pilots run through the last of their checks. With the chocks out, Captain Neil slowly brings the throttle up, and before long we're rolling out of the apron and onto the taxiway to find our runway. Today, it's a southerly takeoff down Ellington's 9,000-foot-long 17R. I have to admit, I was a little nervous. I'm a nervous flyer at the best of times, what can I say? Not exactly the best quality for an airplane nerd to enjoy, but the cool and calm demeanour of the crew made me feel at ease, and we came to a brief rest to gain final takeoff approval. I could feel the excitement building. With something like 9,600 horsepower at his command, Captain Neil nudged the throttle forward, the propellers growled, and Fifi began to roll. We were taking off. The Superfortress climbs so gently and gradually that you hardly notice you've actually left the ground at all. Only as the trees begin to look slightly too small do you realise you're up and away. The B-29 pilot's job, as soon as he first takes off, is to get some speed, a rush of fresh air to cool down those monstrous radial engines. Paul Tibbets, pilot from the Enola Gay, recalled that the B-29 pulled to the left thanks to torque. The average mass production pilot, he said, offsets torque by braking his right wheels. It's a rough ride. You lose 10 miles an hour and you delay the takeoff. Pilots of the 509th group were taught to cancel torque by leading in with your left engines, advancing throttles ahead of the right. At 80 miles an hour, you get full rudder control, advance the right-hand engine to full power, and, in a moment, you're airborne. It must be a strange feeling for Captain Neal, so used to dealing with modern commercial jet aircraft, to get into the seat of an 80-year-old warbird.
I would say the first thing is that you're terrified. If you're not nervous, then you're not doing it right, because of course it's a national treasure. And the real difference, and it's something we like to highlight when pilots come to these airplanes. If you've flown, say, in the military or commercial aviation, aircraft are designed a certain way where you have margins and they have certification standards that they meet, which means you get to fly into those margins if you need them. Of course, this airplane, this is a purpose-built war machine. The margins do not exist. A great example for us, some of the unique handling characteristics are, these have no nose wheel steering and the brakes are very, very difficult to use. So that adds a whole dimension of complexity. The other thing is performance. While the airplane does perform, at the weights we operate at, we limit it much lower than they would have at the war. So we're able to recover some of those margins, but even by doing so, you still don't have nearly the performance that you would have in a commercial or military type aircraft. So you're kind of right there on the margins. Yeah, well here, this is kind of a fun thing I'll show you, and if you want to pan to the yoke, this is always a demonstration we do for all the new pilots, because they need to understand that without mechanically boosted flight controls, the yoke has significant travel fore and aft, and that's not even all the way. But the really interesting one, for example, today with these 30-knot winds, we would be making crosswind corrections trying to roll into the wind. The problem is the yoke, we're nowhere close. It goes all the way over to here. And that's simply because of mechanical advantage that you need to move the big 142-foot wing, which is actually bigger than a 757. Another interesting thing is you notice the throttles are backwards. Normally the throttles are on center, but we have 3 sets of throttles between the pilot, co-pilot, and the flight engineer.
Before long, we're at altitude, the engine's humming rhythmically, loud without earphones on, but not painfully so. Corbett keeps a fuselage panel open so he can see the starboard engines, but the streamlined nose keeps any wind or breeze out of the flight deck. It's amazing to see this 80-year-old aircraft flying so seemingly effortlessly, but it wasn't a straightforward path, and we're rather lucky to still have her. Finished too late to see the Second World War, Fifi was turned instead into a B-29A, a trainer and radar target variant which provided valuable use to the USAAF as it developed radar-guided interceptor tactics for its new jet aircraft. We tend to think of the B-29 as a Second World War bomber, but probably most of its useful life was spent in the years after 1945 up to the Korean War, when tactics were changing all the time. She was actually lucky to make it off the production line at all. Construction of the B-29s was a staggering undertaking. This complicated aircraft was rolling off the lines as part of the largest single aircraft production program of the entire war, involving a variety of factories and thousands of subcontractors. By spring 1945, as many as 8 of these bombers were completed every single day. But then came VJ Day. 3,900 of the B-29s had been built, Fifi included, but 5,092 orders were cancelled. With the United States once again entering peacetime, the wartime production machine was spooled down. B-29s found new jobs, or they were put into desert storage. Nuclear testing was a job that the B-29 was well suited for. Of course, we all know the Enola Gay and Boxcar, the 2 bombers that dropped the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But long after that, the Superfortresses were employed on a wide range of tests. One famously dropped a bomb at Bikini Atoll during Operation Crossroads, but it's thought some 29s, like Fifi, were equipped with special equipment for monitoring nuclear radiation levels after testing. The B-29 was at the very forefront of pioneering weapons testing, but it also became a trusty platform for another bewildering array of tasks. B-29s were used to test so-called parasitic fighters like the McDonnell XF-85 Goblin. One carried the Bell X-1 supersonic rocket on Chuck Yeager's legendary flight in October 1947. Yet one more of those bizarre tests saw a B-29 used for a Project MX-1016 Tiptoe, a clever pun, which was meant to see fighter jets coupled via their wingtips to a big bomber to hitch a free ride and not burn up their own fuel. In the event, an F-84 that was being towed by B-29 that way flipped over onto its host and brought it down, killing all the aircrew. That unfortunate incident aside, the B-29 saw some serious success as a test platform for the US Air Force as it worked on bigger, meaner replacements for frontline bombing duty in future conflicts. Those came quickly. In 1950, America became embroiled in Korea, backing the South against the Communist North. Somewhat unbelievably, by that point, the enormous Convair B-36 had changed the game so much that it rendered the B-29 reclassified as a medium bomber. Korea is where the B-29 got a bit of a bloody nose. At the start, it was used in normal daylight raids on North Korean industry, but soon they began to come up against MiG-15s. The Soviet jets managed to down around 16 of the Superfortresses, while ground fire took down 4 more. It was really the dawn of a new age of jet fighter combat. Japanese fighters had struggled to reach the B-29 at altitude back in 1945, but in the 50s, jets could catch it with relative ease. Still, it's a very impressive piece of equipment. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. The well-known American aviation photographer Mike Killian has come alongside to snap some shots of us from a Bonanza. We all smile and wave. Well, I do at least. The flight crew on Fifi looks professional, and they mean business. It's not an easy task doing an in-flight shoot like this, and it took careful coordination. Still, the Bonanza comes in close enough I can see Mike snapping happily away with his huge camera. In a really strange way, the humming of the engines tries to put you to sleep. I remember photos of crewmen snuggled up and napping in the tunnel. I can see why they'd get a good rest in there, because for a lay down, it seems quite comfortable. There's just something about that rhythmic pulsing of the duplex cyclones out there that calms you down. I reflect on Fifi's unlikely story. It wasn't just her construction that was a stroke of fortune, but her preservation as well. After a career that had seen that 29 put into storage in the early 50s, the plane was sent for use as a ballistic missile target at China Lake. Fortunately, the plane survived total destruction. It was acquired by the Commemorative Air Force when Victor Agatha, a member of the team who'd originally helped develop the B-29, financed the outfit and led the recovery of the bomber with the serial number 4462070. Originally, it was a hard sell because some thought it would be more prudent to invest in several fighters like P-51s instead of one big bomber, but Victor was adamant and he promised to back the entire thing himself. The bomber had supposedly been chosen from the few scattered at China Lake partly because she had the best conditioned plexiglass nose. She was named Fifi, after Victor's wife, and flew for 30 years before being grounded for a full engine replacement. Fifi is now the last of one of the most technologically advanced aircraft of the 40s still in the air. Keeping it up there is an expensive, time-consuming, but important job.
So the first thing I would say when you get involved with this is, again, we're here to tell people stories. What we consider our mission is to educate, honor, and inspire. And what that means is we tell the story, we honor those that lived it, and then the last part is the inspire, which is to make people understand, hey, if your dream is to be a part of something like this, you can do it. I can 100% guarantee you that 10 years ago, I would have never dreamed that I would get to command this aircraft, much less even be a part of it. And for example, on a personal level, while I spend time away from my kids, I also hope that by doing this and participating in something that I believe in is meaningful is perhaps a lesson and maybe a little inspirational for them. But I do know they'd rather have me at home, so. So again, it's just, all you can say is it's an honor, but when you're in one of these seats, we play for keeps. It's very serious. This is one of a kind, and we just can't compromise on anything.
It's a way for me to connect to my grandfather, who flew Constellations as a flight engineer back in the 50s, and he's still alive, so having been able to have those conversations with him about, managing engines and doing this and that, it's a lot of fun, and I can see it brings him joy too. But really, it's just I've loved aviation since I was 5, and warbirds I've been involved with forever. Yes, I'm not so much, steering the airplane, but in a lot of ways, what I'm doing is the most important role, so it to me is fun. And I know a lot of people would probably prefer to actually fly, but I find this the enjoyable part. It's a very dying breed. There's a handful now that are flight engineers on reciprocating airplanes. You could probably fit them in a room, like, with how little there are. And so it's fun to be able to be the young guy in that, but also hopefully try and get some younger people like me inspired to be like, hey, this isn't impossible to do. It's not some hidden away myth that exists anymore. It's a very easy relatively thing to accomplish as if you set yourself up to do it and you have the passion to do it.
What these guys are doing is magic, keeping history aloft and in the public's eye. I'd read about the B-29 since childhood. I'd seen documentaries on the thing, flown missions on it in the simulator, IL-2 Shtomovic, but nothing prepared me for how the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when one first roared overhead at Wings over Houston Air Show. That's the impact of keeping history alive. It makes it all so much more real. Sitting there in the cockpit watching Neil, Patrick and Corbett do their thing, it's impossible not to think of the young men who did this for a job back in the 40s, men whose age rarely exceeded 30. Neil interrupts my thoughts and his voice crackles through my headset. Would I like to sit in the bombardier's seat? Would I? I carefully climb up past he and Patrick, squeezing through the narrow gap between controls and panels, making sure not to bump anything that might open the bomb bay doors and jettison my luggage over the Texan countryside, and I sit appreciatively with the world at my feet. It's an amazing view up here, and it's a real privilege to get to see it. Fifi has been in movies, flown by legends including Paul Tibbets, and thrilled audiences at air shows and displays for 5 decades now, but Neil and the team have made little old me feel like a VIP. Before long, Fifi is being buffeted by winds and we're working our way lower and lower on approach to Perot Field. Neil and Patrick wrestle with the control columns as they masterfully bring the old bird down. Ground control and the others on the radio seem pleasantly surprised to hear that there's a 4-engine B-29 coming in, and it gives the crew some small glee to know Fifi will be the star of today's show. We line up on the runway and I brace for what I assume will be a heavy jolt, but it never comes. The big tricycle landing gear absorbs the force well, and we simply begin to roll to a halt. Fifi is down, and the flight is over. Guided onto the ramp, we stop. She shakes gently in the wind. I hadn't realised it was so breezy out there. Neil and Patrick have done some brilliant flying. Stepping down the ladder at the nose wheel again, I say goodbye to my new friends. One of them, Jacques, hands me a commemorative cap. I've been made to feel like a part of the crew. And you can too. Fifi offers passenger flights where you and your friends can go as observers or gunners in the tail section, or up front with the flight crew, or even in the bombardier's seat. It's run by the B-24 and B-29 squadron of the CAF, and you can check it out at airpowersquadron.org. For now though, my time with Fifi has come to an end. I retrieve my luggage from the bomb bay, a sentence I never thought I'd actually ever say out loud, and catch a ride back to the terminal. Seeing black and white photos of B-29s is one thing. Flying in it is another. Feeling it respond to the controls and rocking gently in the breeze. It's an elegant machine. You forget that it was ever a weapon of war at all. Fifi is one of the last of an incredible series of engineering achievements from the last century that's still in the air, and she's a testament to the young men that crewed these things in missions over hostile territory that offered no guarantee of safe return. The fact that we, in 2025, can fly in a B-29 without fear of being shot at is a real privilege. Well done to the Commemorative Air Force, and well done, Fifi. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and like it or subscribe to the channel. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Jacques from the Commemorative Air Force, the whole CAF team, Captain Neil Broussard, Patrick Clayton and Corbett Hankins for their excellent flying, and my good friend Kevin from Netweave, who put this whole insane opportunity together.